Good morning again, everyone. Today, as we look at Exodus 2, there's a lot of interesting information in Exodus 2. I will try to, um, as much as I can, I will try to explain it and then you can share your thoughts. Moses was born around 1527 in an unfriendly world. He was the youngest son of Amram and Jochebed. He was born into slavery under a royal death sentence. However, God ensured Moses was dramatically rescued and trained in the court of Pharaoh. Moses had an older brother, Aaron, and an older sister, Miriam. Now, in chapter 1, if we could recall from yesterday that Pharaoh's sentence is that he ordered the midwives to kill the male children. When that did not happen, he said that they should be thrown into the river Nile. And this is the situation. This is the environment that Moses was born into. Moses' parents, Amram and Jochebed, hid him 3 months. The parents of Moses did not do this only because of the natural parental instinct. They did it also out of faith in God. Hebrews 11:23 describes the faith of Moses' parents. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. And, that's a picture there. We know that that's not the real Moses, but that's a beautiful child in that basket anyhow. Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses. Moses' mother did exactly what Pharaoh said to do, put her son into the river. And this is very, this made me, I thought of many times when somebody issue something, some negative thing, and God used the same thing to thwart the efforts of Satan. So she put him in the river, just as how Pharaoh said. However, she placed him in a waterproof basket and strategically floated him in the river. The word for papyrus basket is used only here and for Noah's ark. And, for Moses, this was an ark of safety, just as how Noah's ark was an ark of safety. When Moses' mother released the boat made of bulrushes, she gave up something precious, trusting that God would take care of it. She did not realize God would have returned her precious son to her. Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses. Under God's guidance, Pharaoh's daughter found baby Moses. She was conditioned by her culture and upbringing to reject the Hebrews. But the cry of baby Moses melted her heart. God always has a plan. He planned the deliverance of both Moses and eventually for the people of Israel. He skillfully guided the parents of Moses, the currents of the Nile, and the heart of Pharaoh's daughter to further his plan and purpose. And I hope we all, I hope this sink into everybody's mind, that God always has a better plan than we have. He always has a plan. Pharaoh's daughter cares for and raises Moses. Using both the clever initiative of Moses' family and the need, now Pharaoh's daughter didn't have any children, and there was no male heir to the throne of Egypt. As a matter of fact, she eventually became the Pharaoh because there was no male heir. But I can't go into that because there's a lot of history in that, and it will take a lot of time. But the Pharaoh who ruled after her was the one who wanted to kill Moses later on. His name was Ramesses II. I did a lot of that in history, but as I said, I can't go into all of those details right now. God arranged a way for Moses' mother to train him in his early years and be paid for it. Pharaoh's daughter called him Moses because she threw him out of the water. Now, you see, I said, God always has a better plan. Imagine that. Moses' mother was to train Moses, and not only would she be training him, but I could imagine the wages she was getting because she was being paid by Pharaoh's daughter. It was in these early years with his family that Moses learned of the God of the fathers. Because remember when God met him in Exodus 3? Oh, well, you'll come across that tomorrow. But anyway, when God met him, he spoke about the God of the fathers and realized that the Hebrews were his fellow countrymen. That's in verse 11 when he went out to see them. Moses, Egyptian prince and warrior. Moses was royal. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus wrote that Moses was heir to the throne of Egypt and that while a young man, he led the armies of Egypt in victorious battle against the Ethiopians. In Acts 7, verse 22, it says, Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. Egypt was one of the most academic and scientific societies among ancient cultures. It is reasonable to think that Moses was instructed in geography, history, grammar, writing, literature, philosophy, and music. So he was an excellent, learned prince, and he was, he had everything because he was a prince. As a prince, Moses rode in a princely chariot, and his guards cried out, bow the knee. If he floated on the Nile, it was in a magnificent ship with musical accompaniment. He lived the royal life. So Moses was really royal. Moses escapes from Egypt. When Moses was 40 years old, he visited his brethren. That's in verse 11, but Acts 7:23 tells us that he was 40 years old. He was trained and groomed to become the next Pharaoh of Egypt, according to Josephus. But he was aware of his true origins because of his mother. In Hebrews 11, verses 24 to 26 tells us some of what happened in the heart and mind of Moses as he looked at their burdens. It says that by faith, Moses deliberately decided to identify with the people of Israel rather than his Egyptian prestige and opportunity. Verses 11, 24 to 26 say this. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. And Mrs. White in Patriarchs and Prophets said that Moses, many times when he was being taught, he argued with the philosophers and the professors, those who were teaching him, and they couldn't do anything about it because he didn't believe some of the things that they were saying. In Acts 7, verses 23 to 25, the explanation is given that Moses killed the Egyptian to defend and avenge the beaten Israelite, but also with the expectation that his fellow Israelites would recognize him as their deliverer. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian. For he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but he did not understand. But they, his fellow Israelites or fellow Hebrews, did not understand that Moses was there to deliver them, and that wasn't God's plan anyhow. Just like Jesus, Moses could not deliver when he lived in the palaces of glory. He had to come down off the throne, away from the palace, and into a humble place before he could deliver his people. Moses planned the deliverance of Israel the way any man would, and logically saw himself as a key man because of his royal background, education, success, and sympathy for his people. Moses had his plans and they made sense from his perspective, yet God's plan was radically different. God's plan is always unexplainable. 40 years as a shepherd leading sheep was God's preparation for Moses. Moses, fleeing for his life, probably felt that God's plan for his life was completely defeated. He probably believed that every chance he ever had to deliver his people was now over and there was nothing he could do. At this point, Moses was right where God wanted him. Moses probably had little idea of it at the time, but he was too big for God to use. Moses tried to do the Lord's work in man's wisdom and power, and it didn't work. After 40 years of seemingly perfect preparation, God had another period of preparation for both Moses and the people of Israel to make them ready to receive Moses. You see, God wasn't only preparing Moses, he had to prepare the children of Israel, his people, because remember the time when Moses tried to deliver them when he struck that Egyptian, when he killed the Egyptian, and he tried to part the two men who were fighting. The next day, they said, who made your prince over us? Are you going to kill me just like how you killed the Egyptian yesterday? So they did not, they were not ready. And we have to remember that that's why we can't put our plans into actions unless God has directed us to do them, because God always has a plan and he has to make whatever is happening, he has to make both sides ready. And this is what happened. Now, I just want you to have a look at, where Moses went. He, as you can see, left Egypt and went all across the Sinai Peninsula. That's quite a journey until he came to Midian. And it's interesting what happened to him at Midian. If Moses went into the area of Canaan and Syria, he would have found no refuge. There was a treaty between Ramesses II and the Hittite king to the effect that fugitives along the northern route to Syria would be arrested and extradited. So Moses went southeast instead to Midian, the area on both the west and east sides of the Red Sea, land that today is both Saudi Arabia on the east of the Red Sea and Egypt on the Sinai Peninsula on the west of the Red Sea. Finally, coming to Midian, Moses met the 7 daughters of Reuel, the priest of Midian. And note, the priest of Midian is also called Jethro. According to research, Reuel was his surname. But anyhow, the Bible, most books have Reuel, and then later they talk about Jethro. It's the same person. Jethro was most likely a descendant of one of Abraham's other children through Keturah named Midian, and that can be found in Genesis 25, verses 1-2. These girls, or these sisters, they thought he was an Egyptian, and the reason why they thought he was an Egyptian, maybe the way he was dressed and his speech and everything, as remember when the maid said to Peter that your speech betrays you. Well, we know that because those of us, we are from different countries and each one of us speak differently. And especially those people who are well-educated, they speak differently from those who are not well-educated. Well, sometimes it's perception, but his speech and the way he dressed, as Mrs. White commented, they thought he was an Egyptian. God led Moses to this specific family at this specific time. Like Jacob, Moses met his future wife at a well. Interesting. Maybe we should sort for some wells. Those of us who are looking for husbands and wives, you may find them at a well. Yeah, it's interesting. When I was doing this, I said, God, you really have a sense of humor. Finding the wife at the well. Well, they spoke about wives, but maybe there might be husbands waiting at some well for those of us who are looking for husbands. Moses is accepted into the family of the priest of Midian. Moses was content to live with Reuel, as I said before, Jethro. By taking a wife and having a son, Moses seems to give up on Egypt and his hope of being a deliverer for Israel. Moses was content with where God put him, even though Midian was very different from Egypt, and of course, very different from the palace that he lived in and the life that he was living. His wife's name was Zipporah, and it might translate as warbler, or less kindly, according to research Twitterer, it's the name of a small bird. And that bird twits all the time. So I don't know why Jethro named his wife, his daughter Zipporah. Moses in Midian. Moses named his son Gershom. This name, meaning stranger, was evidence of some loneliness, living apart from either the Egyptians or the Hebrews. Moses' years in Midian were working and training years. He had never worked this hard in his life. God trained him, shaping him for his future calling, because, as you know, leading sheep is not easy. You have to be very patient, and Moses needed that. You have to be patient, you have to be compassionate, you have to be caring. So, like David, one of the best kings of Israel, a man after God's own heart, the same thing happened with Moses. God was training him to lead his people. In Egypt, Moses learned how to be somebody. In Midian, he learned how to be nobody. Much he had learned in Egypt, but more in Midian. In verses 23 to 25, the end of Exodus 2, it's very, very interesting verses. It said, so God heard their groaning and God remembered. I don't know why the word remembered is used there, because I don't think God ever forgets us when we are mourning, but that's what the Bible says. And God remembered. If Moses forgot about Israel and Egypt, in the sense of turning his active attention away from them, God did not. God remembered, again, in the sense of turning his active attention towards them. That's a better way to explain the word remembered. Israel and their affliction, as I said before, God had a plan, and he had to bring the children of Israel to the point where they were really, really so afflicted that they needed a deliverer. And so this was a time for them to be delivered. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God did not turn his attention to Israel because they were such good people, but because of the covenant he made with them. He gives his love and attention to us on the same basis, the covenant relationship we have with God through Jesus.